125 Price Avenue, Knoxville, Tennessee, conducted by Dr. Charles Johnson, the University of Tennessee Department of History. Interview conducted on October 23rd, 1986. Laurels overall. Yeah, that's where we are. Sure it's going. You're talking about the artillery and I would imagine from what I read that artillery makes pretty messy wounds for an aid man to have to try to deal with.
It's legs, arms, and there are other parts of the body that wounded pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
Mortars are as bad as artillery, in some cases worse.
How
They drop them right in on you.
Yeah. Uh-huh. You mean in terms of the wounds that they've got, or?
Well, the mortars, your artillery is just flying it everywhere, and the mortars, they're dropping it in on you pretty close.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
We drove the Germans out of many spots that we couldn't get them out with mortars. If mortars could reach them, you can get them out there with mortars. Because we had 81 millimeter mortar, chemical mortar outfits attached to us. They'd burn them out of places they couldn't get them out with them chemicals. Phosphorus, yeah. Burn them out. I'll tell you, when they start getting that phosphorus on them, they shag.
Yeah, I imagine. Did you ever come under fire from Germans that had phosphorus grenades, or?
Well, if I did, I didn't know of it.
Uh-huh.
Didn't know of it.
You probably would have if you had.
Wasn't close enough to me that if they could have been firing them, but I never really knew about it. There's another instance I'd like to tell about before we got to Cherbourg. Captain Marchand said, Hank says, take your squad, that squad, and that squad, 3 squads of you. Says, go down the Cherbourg Highway. We were about 5, maybe 6 miles out of Cherbourg. He says, there's a curve, it turns to your right there and drops off. He says, 150 to 100 yards before you get there, you bear off to the left and come around behind these buildings. There's 3 German wounded soldiers in front of those buildings, and we've been given orders to get them out of there. So we go around that way, and we get around the front, and we give them morphine and get them on the litters and start back out with them, and the Germans lay artillery down on us. We do not see another American soldier or German soldier on that entire trip. We was in no man's land. But yet they laid artillery down on us, carrying their wounded out. I can see that artillery today flying through the air in front of me, bouncing on the ground in front of me, bouncing to the left of me. And would you believe 12 litter bearers and 3 German wounded soldiers on a litter never got a scratch out of that? Now that's hard to believe.
I was going to say, that's hard to believe.
That's awful hard to believe, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But we did not get a scratch out of that.
Do you think when they called the fire in on you that they knew you were medics evacuating people?
They knew what we was. We got Red Cross on the sides of our helmets, on the front of our helmets, and armbands. There's no way they could not know. They had observation on that curve and knowed exactly what we were and what we were doing. That's why we was to leave the road, because they had observation on that curve, and any vehicle hit it, they shelled it. We never did, the 22nd never did get into Cherbourg. We surrounded a big underground air base and jutted out in the peninsula. Cherbourg failed, and it still hadn't failed. They shoot AK guns, direct fire at us. They finally got in there with loudspeakers and spoke German to them, telling them that Cherbourg had failed. It was only a matter of hours that they would have to surrender. They was completely surrounded. There's a colonel in charge of them, and he came out and talked surrender terms and said he'd come out the next morning After breakfast, they come out 4 abreast, marched out. One little German corporal stepped out of ranks and said, I would like to see that automatic artillery in action before you shoot me. He thought it was automatic because our batteries fired in such concessions of each other. He thought it was automatic.
Automatic weapons, huh?
Yeah, he thought the artillery was automatic.
Boy, they must have really felt they were under fire.
He says we stick our heads out and we stick them back right fast. That artillery coming in. I went in, looked in them underground bunkers, concrete and steel.
Would have been real tough to dig those people out if you'd had to go and do that.
After that, Cherbourg had all completely surrounded. The 3rd Battalion met in an assembly area, and we hiked down through the low grounds about 10 miles. We had to go back into Montyburg. The Germans had been running out of there twice, and we had to go get them out again.
Mm-hmm.
So we started down the highway to Montyburg, and we swung off to the left so they wouldn't observe us, and we got in there about dusky dark. And they fought all night long, and next morning they was all cleaned out, and we had them all cleaned out of there again.
3rd Battalion take pretty heavy casualties in those first days?
Yes. I guess the book you have from Charles War will tell you how many casualties we had up to the 1st of July. The 4th Division had around over 5,000 casualties from June 6th to the 1st of July.
They were right in very...
Out of the 6 divisions that went to Cherbourg, 101st Airborne, 82nd Airborne, the 90th Division, the 9th, and I believe the 78th and the 4th. The 4th had the most casualties. See, we was next to the channel, having to clean out all them gun positions and things along the channel.
Uh-huh. And all of those casualties, the medics had to handle one time or another, one way or another.
Either we handled them or some of the infantry got them back to the aid stations. Lots of them was the infantry boys brought them back to the aid stations, you know. Because there's so many of them, no way in the world we could take care of all of them. Mm-hmm. Just think of 9,359 casualties in a regiment that had about 155 men, counting their officers as medics. Can you imagine 155 men are taking care of 9,359 casualties?
No.
Of course, 1,693 of them were killed or died of their wounds received. Lots of them died after they was evacuated.
Mm-hmm.
We went into a rest area then at St. Mary Glees, France. They was going to give us a 10-day rest. We had our tents pitched under the apple trees around St. Mary Glees, France. And after about the 4th day, there's runners running through the apple orchards said, be ready to move out on foot in 10 minutes. The 83rd Division was up around Pierre's, and they was running off, leaving their guns and everything from counterattacks. Remnants of 2 SS divisions up there. So we dog-trotted to the front lines. And that was the Battle of St. Lo. And Pierre's was an important highway through Pierre's that they had to clear that out to assure of being able to take St. Lo. Mm-hmm. And about the 3rd night we was there, they started slipping Tiger tanks down a little old country lane on us. First one come through that sent up at Sherman. How the Sherman knocked it out, I don't know, but there was 7 or 8 holes through that Sherman. Looked like you took an auger and bored them through. Them 88s went through it.
Didn't go off, just blew right on through.
Just went right on through it, bored holes in it. So some more started down, and the sergeant in G Company went up with a bazooka gun, and he knocked the first one out. He could hear another one squeaking, and he went on up the road so he wouldn't discover what he'd done to that one, and he knocked another one out. So he got two of them there with
Uh-huh.
a bazooka gun.
That's very brave work to go up against
Oh,
a
yes.
tank with a little rocket launcher.
And you wonder how that it can turn them over on their sides.
Hmm. Hits real hard.
Powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
A little later on there at Pierre's, we would begin to get pretty heavy casualties, and one day we had to go into I Company. And this officer had them, the lieutenant had them to dig their foxholes down under big trees. And the Germans were shooting tree burst artillery in there, and it's just raining right down into their foxholes. They worked us all day long carrying them out of there, the litter squads. All day long we worked to get them out of there. One particular one I remember, he was shot up so bad that we had to find some old K-ration boxes. We had to splint both legs and both arms before we could even pick him up out of his foxhole. We got him on the litter, and one of the boys asked him if he smoked, and he just dodged his head a little, and he lit a cigarette and put up in his mouth. And when we started out of there, he had a smile on his face. He's just happy to hell he was getting out of there, and them shot all to hell.
Hmm.
As we started out with him, our first aid man, Edward Leatherman, he's from Dayton, Ohio. He says, Hank, he says, I've got one more over here under this barn door. I've got this barn door over him. I said, well, we'll be back for him pretty soon. We was gone, I guess, 30 minutes. We come back, and Ed was laying there dead. Artillery had blowed. See, we was carrying him out on the artillery fire all the time we was there. Had blowed his left arm off, and he was laying there dead. I doubt very seriously where he had a foxhole. He was a funny fella. He was a first aid station attendant. He got mad at Captain Marchand and said, just sign me to a company. So they sent him to I Company. He didn't have to be an aid man. He could have been back there at the aid station.
Hmm. But he didn't get along with the captain.
He got mad at Captain Marchand about something I never did know what for. I never did say anything to Marchand on any of those missions he sent me on if it didn't, just like that mission he sent us on when there wasn't nobody there, had the troops. I never mentioned it to him, never said nothing to him about it, because I know he had a lot on his mind.
Yeah.
Never did say anything to him, but he used me like I was a lieutenant or a sergeant.
Were you a PFC or corporal or
I was
private?
T5.
T5.
I was a corporal, but I traded it off for a T5. A corporal in a medical aid station section is second in command non-com of 37 men.
Uh-huh.
But I was given that as a supply clerk. I wasn't supposed to have a corporal rating. Four corporal ratings in the medical detachment. Four staff sergeants. Even the supply sergeant is only a buck sergeant. First sergeant in the medics was only a tech sergeant. He wasn't a master.
I didn't realize that. I didn't know that they had that TOE.
You had lots of technicians. Technicians 5th grade, 4th grade, and 3rd grade. 3rd grade, same as the staff.
Mm-hmm.
We had more of them than we had staff sergeants. Because we just had one staff sergeant with each 3 battalion aid station regimental section. And had 4 corporals the same way.
And so you were a T5.
I traded my corporal for a T. Well, they come to me in spring of '43. Well, Bill Malin was going away to OCS and Medical Administrative course. I'd filled out OCS papers, but I wouldn't put infantry on them, and they just threw in the waste paper basket, I was told. I'd use everything but that, you know.
Uh-huh.
And the reason I wouldn't put it on there, the first 90-day wonders had come out of Fort Benning, Georgia to us. I was going down to Regimental Supply to submit some requisitions, and they had their khakis on, and the second lieutenant bars and buck corporals and buck sergeants was drilling them in squads, and I said that never will happen to me. And I wouldn't put the infantry on them. papers. They'd come after me every time they put on the drive because they had a high IQ. So Bill come to me and said, Hank says, I've got good, reliable sources. If you'll give up your supply clerk duties and go to straight duty and buck real hard so everybody knows you're bucking for my rating, says you'll get it. I looked him right square in the eye and I said, Bill, if I'm not qualified for your rating as I am, I don't want it. So I didn't get it and never got nothing else. So I traded that corporal off for a T5, get out from on all them duties. They'd come and get me out of the supply room to go out with the 2nd Battalion when that sergeant there, Daniel's an old Army sergeant, he'd always managed to go to the hospital. It's very close veins when we was going out on a problem. They'd come and get me to fill in this sergeant on that when they had a corporal. So I just got tired of it, and so I swapped it.
Did the Tech 5.
Yeah. Same pay. But we had quite a few that went to OCS, left us.
With, you were at Battalion Aid Station most of the time. This is where you were attached?
Just before, right after Pierre's, this 22nd went over to Carytown to reassemble for the big breakthrough at St. Lo.
Right.
They sent me back to a rest camp and put me to sleep for 3 or 4 days. It wore me out.
Yeah, I was going to say, you probably hadn't been having much sleep or rest.
And it absolutely wore us out. And I wasn't the only one they sent back. They sent some more. Some of them they reclassified them, sent them on somewhere else. But they sent me back to the front. I caught up with 4th Division Medical Battalion one day before July the 25th, the big bombing. And I stayed with them 2 or 3 nights because they did not know where the 22nd Infantry Regiment was because it's all in secrecy. They was the main spearhead through St. Lo for the breakthrough, attached to the 2nd Armored Division. So I stood and watched the bombers bomb the front lines like that.
Right in front of you, or not very far away from you.
And that night, Bed Check Charlie come over, and he wasn't gone but about 20 minutes till the bombers come bombing. And there's an ordnance outfit that moved across the road from where we were, and in this same big field on the other end was a field hospital set up. And they just bombing the devil out of it. So I run out, I got in a German foxhole that the Germans was in a couple of days before that. Normally I wouldn't have done that. I got in that foxhole, and the last bomb they dropped on our side. Between my foxhole I was in and where they dropped it was a 2.5-ton truck, and it tore the tires off that thing into ribbons, them little slugs, you know. And 4th Battalion tents out there where the wounded was in, but they had them on litters on the ground. They was on litters. And it goes out this way, them personnel bombs. And he had shot holes through them tents like riflemen was having a field day shooting holes in them.
Good thing you were in a hole.
Well, the next day, they found out where the regiment was, and they was going in to get wounded, and so I joined regimental headquarters, and I stayed with them for about a month.
Oh,
And Major Kirtley says, Hank says, service company don't have a medic. I wonder if you'll go over and be their medic. I said, yes, sir, I'd be happy to do that. So I went to service company, and I was their medic for the rest of the war.
What sort of duty did you have with them? What were you doing?
Well, lots of them got hurt handling the ammunition and rations, and kept them patched up, and they get sick. I'd doctor them. I'd get different cases. I'd call regimental, talk to Dr. Kirtley, he'd tell me what I needed to do, and he'd send me whatever medicine I need. If they had a cold, chest cold, I'd give them 2 aspirins and a half grain of codeine. If they had dysentery, well, I'd give them white business tablets. If it was cramping with it, I'd give them charcoal flavored and a shot of Paragard. I tell lots of people I was a walking drugstore on the front lines.
Sounds like it.
I took care of replacements waiting to go out with the ration trucks to their companies to be signed to, and service company men. I took care of 67 cases of dysentery at one time. Had that many cases in there that I was passing out pills to.
A real problem.
I had cascari too, constipation. I had everything to doctor them with, you know. I kept aspirins by the 1,000 in a bottle, and I kept pints of Paragard and thousands of those business tablets, both kinds.
Did you have a Jeep to carry the stuff with?
I just carried it in my duffel bag. Just carried it in my bag. Barracks bag I had. See, I rode on the truck all the time with them.
Yeah.
Service company, I just get on the truck and throw my stuff on. I had 2 shelter halves. I could pitch a tent, you know, and keep my medical supplies on one side and sleep on the other. Later on, I got tied in with the supply sergeant. He'd pitch one of them big pyramid tents, you know, for their supplies for the company, and me and him would sleep in there in that big tent.
Sounds like a less dangerous life than you had when you were
Oh yes.
just coming ashore there.
Yes, sure was.
Did service company, were they far enough forward to come under artillery fire every once in a while?
Sometimes we was closer than some of the companies were, depending on what kind of terrain features you had. In the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, the service company was on this little mountain. And we stayed there the entire time of the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest. We did not move off of that little mountain. Of course, there's some pillboxes there, 1 or 2, and the officers kept their command post in the pillboxes, but the rest of us stayed outside. They shelled in that area most every night. Most of it went over into the valley below, trying to knock out our artillery, then bring up the big railroad guns and fire, trying to knock out our artillery. A few times they laid it in around us. In fact, there's one evening there, the big railroad guns fired, and they didn't go off as duds, but where they'd hit a tree, trees that big around would be laying over just like a hurricane come through and knocked them over.
Big shells.
Yeah. Big stuff.
I imagine you got so you could tell the difference by sound with what was coming over.
Oh yes. We moved out of there and we went to Luxembourg. We was on a 35-mile front in Luxembourg, and we had 7,500 casualties in the 4th Division up there in 18 days. So we was way under strength, holding a 35-mile front.
Yeah.
We was there about 10 days, and the Germans' winter offensive drive started, the Battle of the Bulge. I talked to Captain George Hassel at one time, was a 22nd Infantry supply officer, and him and Major Guy O.D. Young was our 22nd supply officer. They'd been sent to division, and on the front lines they was division supply officers. And he said when we moved down to Luxembourg, said General Barton, he was a fanatic staying ahead on ammunition because you was rationed so many rounds for each gun you had. And he said I had 6,000 extra rounds of 81 millimeter mortar and 8,000 extra rounds of 105 howitzer. No, 155 howitzer instead of 105. And said I bagged, borrowed, stole, swapped, traded any way I could to get extra ammunition. And we had this special dump over here, and I called Corps headquarters 3 days before that drive started and asked them permission to move it. And they said they didn't think it was necessary to move it. So when those 2 German divisions come across the Moselle River, they was headed right for that supply dump. They couldn't get transportation in there to move it, so they just rushed every 81 millimeter mortar they could get a hold of in there, and they fired all 6,000 rounds into them 2 German divisions, cut them to ribbons. And that's how the 4th Division stopped that advance on Luxembourg City. They held on by their shoestrings till they got relief, refused to let them have it.
Mm-hmm. And they had all that 81 ammunition in there to use.
They shot it all into them. They would rather than let them have it, they let them
Yeah.
have it
Oh,
the
yeah.
way they didn't want it. The way they didn't want it.
And they never, and they held that position then.
Yes, so we didn't give no ground. Ed Potts told me on the 40th anniversary D-Day trip there at the Park Hotel there at Berdorf, he says, Hank, I had my platoon, he was a platoon sergeant, around that little hotel, and across them fields you can see this way or 100, 150, and this way 200 yards, and down through yonder maybe 300 yards. They'd come out of them woods, and we'd lay our mortars and machine gun fire on them. And when it cleared up, of course, the ground was covered with snow and froze. He said when it cleared up, they counted over 700 dead Germans out there in that field. Said they stacked on top of each other.
Kept coming, didn't they?
Yeah.
When you picked up German wounded, were they treated pretty much like American wounded, or you?
No difference. They was looked at the same as if it was one of ours. Given the same care.
Did they sort of seem like one of ours? Did they seem different
Well,
to you?
really, I never was associated with them much around the aid station because I was out there carrying them in, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But now the 3 that we got down there where they laid the artillery on us, all 3 of them had lived in the United States and worked up around Detroit and places.
Oh, really? So they could speak
When
English then?
we started to give them morphine, they all said nick, nick, nick. But after we started out there, they talked better English than some of us did.
I wonder what the guy thought the German that had the potato masher grenade that you had to talk him out
Well,
of
now
that.
he was one of them died in the war, been taught to either kill or be killed.
I see.
That's like that wouldn't come out, you know, wanted to see that automatic artillery before
Yeah.
we killed him, see. He'd been taught he'd be shot and killed, or he wouldn't have said that.
Right.
He wouldn't have said that. Up in the big pocket there, at the breakthrough at St. Lo, we had 3 drivers, medical drivers, in one battalion that they knew that they always dug a foxhole together. And they got a direct hit, a bomb one night when they was bombing us. That's all they knew was. They knew that they all dug in together, one big foxhole. They got a direct hit. A fellow named Brigance from Arkansas, Young was from Ohio, and Sweeney was from Indiana. You've got their names on that list I had there. I think the ones that didn't have one of them had the date on it, and the other 2 I think I filled them in with pen the days they killed, because it's all 3 killed at the same time.
It was a bomb. Was it a short bomb from an American bomber, or was
No,
it
it's Germans.
it was German?
That's the time they bombed us was at night. There on the last, you see, we had too much Air Force out during the day for them.
But they did come in at night.
They'd check Charlie, come over at dusky dark, take pictures, and depending on how far the airstrip was, and he'd be back in 15 or 20 minutes bombing. They'd be back bombing. And they was given orders not to fire on them to give away positions.
So you just hunkered down and took it. And
Yeah.
Now at the Battle of the Bulge, where were you when?
When the Battle of Bulge started, I was I was quartered right out of Luxembourg City in a big golf club. People come from all over the world to play golf there. And we were quartered in that building. Most of us slept up in the attic. Officers had rooms they slept in.
Had you,
And our ammunition was out maybe 100 yards from the building in tents away from the building.
had you been thinking that the war was pretty nearly over before that battle, or do you think it was going to go on a
Well,
while?
no, we didn't have any idea when it would be over. Just didn't know. We, our maintenance crew worked in the garage in Luxembourg City, and we kept a little fund chipped in, and they'd bring a case of wine and one of them little short kegs of Luxembourg beer in every night, and we'd drink a little beer or wine there and had a big fireplace there to warm by and everything before we went to bed at night. Bombers come over at night, that building, boy, just shook like that. They'd be flying so low, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of terrible up there in that attic when them things went over. We moved from there, and we moved down to Christnach, Germany, down towards the Moselle River. We moved down in an area there that the 5th Division was in. And so happened that part of regimental headquarters moved across the road from where service company was. And I had a tooth that the filling was cracked in it, and I just couldn't hardly drink that hot GI coffee. That just really gave me a fit. So Captain Rainus, Captain Ziegler had been working with the 3rd Battalion after Captain Scott got wounded, and I presumed he was still with them. And I got up enough nerve to go over to get Captain Rainus to fill that tooth for me. And he was a Jewish officer and had big old thick glasses, you know, and he was roughing the cob. Ziegler was fine dentist. So I go over and tell him I wanted to get that tooth fixed. In this building, and you can see the snow out the windows and up on the hill back there. Little Piper Cubs, you know, field artillery observers, and the Germans were shooting shells over there trying to reach them. They was trying to knock them planes out. So they got started, you know, in the system. They had the pump, you know, for him.
Mm-hmm.
He started drilling on that teeth. He said, that hurt, that hurt. He wouldn't give you a chance to tell it was. So at one of the reunions just before he died, I told that on him. I said I could see the shells were bursting out the window in the snow, and I was more scared of him than I was them shells. Then he turns around and tells this on himself. He says, well, now since you told that on me, I'll tell this one on myself. Says Sergeant Garcia, our guy that was decorated with the Medal of Honor, I had the greatest honor I felt I ever had was to work on his teeth. And while I was working on his teeth, he looked up to me and says, Captain, says, I'm a damn sight scareder of you than I am them damn Germans. Hey, poor old fella died about 2 or 3 months after that reunion.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he lived up in Chicago, suburb of Chicago. Yeah, he's quite a character.
Did you have, from where you were located, did you have anything to do with the British at all? Were there any British troops around?
No, we never was much around them.
You were down south a little bit more than...
They had their own setup, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, General Lawton Collins, I seen him on television here not too awful long, a year or so ago. He's still alive.
Yeah,
for
Lightning Joe Collins.
He said that the big pocket, fleece pocket, that if the British had done what they're supposed to do like we did and moved up and closed up the gap, there's estimated 20,000 Germans got out that gap that they could have closed and sealed them off. But that's the way they fought. They were supposed to, their objective D-Day was Caen.
Mm-hmm.
We took Cherbourg about quick as they took Caen. 21 days. And they're still fighting for Caen.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think it took so long? Was it commanders or troops or?
Just the way they fight. They don't like, they'll take a place and it gets too hot, they retreat. Well, you know what our commander said? Don't like to pay for real estate twice.
I can understand that.
Now that's the way our commanders felt. We don't like to buy real estate and pay for it twice. I remember back in the hedgerows, one of our chaplains came and talked to us when we was kind of in a little rest area there and quiet. He said, the short time we've been on foreign soil, I have found one thing out. There's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. And there's another thing I've found out. I have not found one single square inch of land over here worth the life of a single American soldier. Never forget that.
I imagine up in the hedgerows, that's when you were really physically closest to the Germans, right?
Right.
Those first
Sometimes
days.
at night, company would be digging in, and they'd hear, wonder who that is digging on the other side, and all at once, hell, that's the Jerry's, and they'd start throwing each other's hand grenades back to each other before they went off.
That's closer than you'd like to be.
Oh, yes. The Germans got to where they'd play dead late in the evening. When we was moving up a little bit, they'd play dead. Got dark, they'd get up, they'd be behind us, you see. So they give them orders, says, when you see these German soldiers are laying, you think they're dead, put a round in them, see if they are. Played that old trick once too many, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
They was pretty sharp on some things. I know the daily logs that they captured all the way up to Cherbourg pretty much read the same. They said the Americans are making so many mistakes and gaining by them, we just don't know how to cope with them. Throw that handbook away.
Did you come up on any SS divisions or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
At Pierre's, we were against the remnants of 2 SS divisions. That's the outfit that run the 83rd Division off the front lines. They left 1 battalion to be cut to ribbons, and we saved what was left of them when we got up. I run into one individual in Maryville. It was a produce man, the store I called on. And one day he said something about the Army. He said, was you in the Army? I said, yes. He said, what was you in? I said, I was in the 4th Infantry Division. He said, my gracious alive. If it wasn't for the 4th Division, I wouldn't be here today. I was in that battalion that the 83rd and the rest of them run off and left us up there after the Germans cut us to ribbons. And the 4th Division saved us. He said, I owe my life to the 4th Division, he said.
That's nice to hear. You mentioned that the time that all those artillery shells went off and they were duds, I mean, that they came in and they didn't go off because they were duds. Did you have quite a bit of that?
Quite a bit of it, and I read an article on that the French people in these ammunition factories there in France left a lot of the detonators out intentionally, and that's where it came in. They saved lots of American lives by doing that.
Sabotage.
Just didn't put the detonators in them, left them out.
Sooner or later, you crossed the Rhine, didn't you? Or did you?
Take down the Battle of Bulge, we down at Kristnack, Germany there, on the Moselle, and one evening we got orders after chow that we were moving. And we rode about 80 square miles across into Bastogne, where the 101st was defending there at the Bulge, because we were original liberators all them towns through there, St. Vit and St. Hubert. So we rode all night about 80 miles across them ice and snow-covered roads. And our job was to start pushing them back towards Koblenz, right in the heart of where the heart of the Battle of Bulls came. And we were in areas where we'd been before. Prune, we took Prune or Prum or whatever they want to call it, you know, they pronounce it some different ways. We took that town and quite a few that we didn't take when we was there before. And then when the First Army came down and circled the Germans out in front of us towards Koblenz, they loaded us up in 48 boxcars and shipped us to southern France to the 7th Army.
Oh, uh-huh.
And that's where that letter come in, that after 199 days, the 4th Division has been relieved combat with the enemy. And we thought we were out of the war. But about 10 days, we made a crossing on the Rhine River at Worms and started a rat race. At times, the rear of our regiment and the front of it was 100 miles apart. We was moving so fast. We'd stop somewhere and just go in the houses and flop down in what rooms the people wasn't using with their bedrolls, and maybe we was there an hour or two, and they said, "We're rolling again, up and going again."
You'd acquired enough trucks by then to pretty well carry the troops along, or were people marching?
Well, no, they trucked them. You know, on them marches like that, they trucked them.
You were, the troops that you all were facing must have been just sort of the tail end of the German army.
Well, they were, when we got across the Rhine River, they were scattered in bad, they was in bad condition because they had been defeated on every front, badly, and mauled.
How far east did you get? How far into Germany did you get?
Well, we, on May the 5th is when we left the 7th Army. We was about 12 miles out of Munich. We could see the Swiss Alps. It snowed on us that morning. And there was 4 infantry divisions lined up there to take Munich, and they declared it an open city. But a couple of days before that, a whole Austrian army surrendered to us, and they just let our officers march them 4 abreast on to the rear. Let them march their own army back. And we pulled out there on May the 5th, got on Hitler's Autobahn highway, and went to a little town just outside of Nuremberg. And it wasn't but a short time after that we crated up to come back to the States. We sailed out of the harbor on July the 8th and landed in New York on July the 11th.
Did you think there was any chance you were going to go off and fight the Japanese, or?
Yes, we did. Because any of us that had to have our last 2 battle campaign star points to make our 88 points, they did not put them on our service records till they got us on the boat.
What was the reason for that?
Bring us back to help train a division up. We had replacements land in Le Havre, VE Day. Bunch of young replacements. That was the purpose. And then the day before I should report back off my 30-day furlough, they signed peace with Japan.
So you did get that 30-day furlough and got,
yes.
You come back to Knoxville?
Well, my wife was living in La Follette. She worked in La Follette Hospital out there, a registered nurse.
Well, I didn't realize you were married in this,
Yeah.
when you went in the service.
Well, I got married after I went in.
Oh, uh-huh. And then you had a 30-day leave, and as you were supposed to report back, then the Japanese surrendered.
Day before they signed peace with Japan.
Uh-huh.
And I went back to division, went to Camp Buckner, Durham, North Carolina. And we rode the train out of Atlanta whole group of us out of the southeast back to Camp Butler. They met us at the train, poured down rain, the tops down, and we all was soaking wet, and a couple of days after that I was down sick again, was put in the hospital with chronic bronchitis and sinus. I spent nearly all my time at Butler in the hospital. And one of the boys in the medical detachment came up, was on the ward I was in, said, Hank, said, did you know you missed being discharged with the first group? Said, they discharged them right here on the post. I said, no, I didn't know that. Said, they fix and send another group up there pretty soon. I said, go over and tell that captain, maybe he'll let me out of here. So he let me go, and there too I was discharged.
Then you came back to this part of the country again?
Oh yeah, I came back to this area, lived in La Follette there for 3 or 4 months till we found this place here in Knoxville, and come back to Knoxville.
Did you have any trouble finding a job when you got back?
I went back to my old company.
Oh,
Went traveling on the road with them.
What, again, tell me what company that was?
Raglan Brothers.
Raglan Brothers.
Wholesale grocery company.
Mm-hmm.
I traveled for them for 5.5 years, and then they was doing some things I didn't like, so I left and went to work for Taylor Grocery Company at Newport, Tennessee, and I traveled for them for 6.5 years.
Were you selling food products to stores?
Grocery stores,
yeah.
yes, and some institutional businesses. And I used to call on this down here at the student place.
Mm-hmm. University Center?
Yeah, I used to sell the cafeteria up here on White merchandise from Taylor's.
Did
Used to sell Andy and his brother Captain down there at restaurants. I used to just go in there and write my own order for them. Go back there and whatever they needed, send them 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 cases of ketchup, whatever they needed, and other stuff, just write it up.
Did you have a hard time forgetting about the war and what happened? Did it give you any trouble after the war was over?
When I first come back, I didn't do anything for 5 weeks but just fish and squirrel hunt.
Can you remember how was it different? I'm really pretty interested in that.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain.
Yeah, I know
You know,
that.
your nerves have been worn to real thin edge.
You're jumpy and
And noises and things like that would get to you, you know, any outstanding loud noise or something that you didn't know what it was. It's just awful hard to explain.
mhm.
But I managed to get over all of it.
Yeah, it 4 or 5 weeks, and then you thought you maybe were.
That's when I finally was decided. They kept wanting me to come back to work, and then I finally decided to go back to work.
Mhm. It must have seemed really different though to have a job that you had to go to, and you'd made it all the way through.
Fantastic too, just to think about. A regiment with 9,359 casualties and you don't get a scratch. I know of one of our higher rank officers, that General Walker said that Lum Edwards down in Mississippi that he didn't, he wasn't wounded. Now Charles Ward, that gave you the history of 22nd, told me that he got 22 pieces of shrapnel at one time.
Was he in the 22nd?
Captain and headquarters of 22nd. Captain Wyman Clark was killed in the Battle of Hurton Forest. He's graduated here at Ray's right up here on White.
Mm-hmm. Most of the people you knew and that you served with were either killed or wounded. Or a lot of them were?
No, there's only 45 of the medics, you know, that were killed.
That's still a lot of people.
There'll only be 44 in that list that I gave you, you know.
Uh-huh.
But I know about Sergeant Bill Anglin, got killed, he wounded when Captain Scott did.
Mm-hmm.
When he come back to duty, they sent him to the 12th Infantry Regiment.
I see.
And he got killed either the first day or the second day back. And the regimental surgeon of the 12th was Major James P. Harmon. He was a captain in the 22nd Medics and a made major of the Fort Dix, New Jersey. I helped him move his stuff up to 12th Infantry Regiment. He was also our supply officer. And I was the clerk under him, see.
Mm-hmm.
When he came back out of the war, he's originally from Chattanooga. He practiced out here at the Fountain City Bank. He had an office out there. He's a pediatrician, doctor. He now lives in Lakeland, Florida. I used to run into him out there. I called on them stores out Broadway, and I used to run into him on one of them and talk with him.
Mm-hmm. Has the 4th Division, they've had annual reunions, haven't they?
The 4th Division has a week's reunion somewhere every year.
When did they start doing that?
World War II veterans, World War I veterans started the 4th Division Association.
So that's been around quite a while
World War II just picked it up. Now the Vietnam have been brought in. 4th Division served in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're Vietnam boys. Some of them are officers in the association. We had representatives of the 4th Division National Association at Washington whenever they had the big monument ceremonies there. Had a place set up in the hotel where they could come in if they wanted to join the 4th Division Association. They could join. They signed up about 300 of them.
So the division keeps on going.
Keeps on going, but like they say, the future of it is the Vietnam veterans.
Mm-hmm.
We're all getting old, dying off fast.
It happens.
See, if somebody was send it in, the deaths will be in the one of the 4th Division papers, taps. They have taps in there for them. The obituaries, everything they're sending in will go right in that paper.
When did you start going to the reunions of the division?
I didn't know anything about it till the spring of 1980.
Oh,
Have no contact, none whatsoever, and a little old boy named Charles Woods,
his brother had a store up on Market Square called Wood's Market. And he died, and Carl, he was a butcher for A&P, and his sister-in-law asked him to come up there and help her run that store. Well, he'd come in down there to pick up groceries. Well, I run into him, I knew him. I run into him coming home on 3-day passes or furlough or something, and had got acquainted with him and knew him, just slightly, you know. And so one day, and he now is butchered a little store a block and a half from me over in South Knoxville, little handy-dandy store. One day he said to me, he said, 4th Division fixed to have a reunion here. Do you belong to that association? I said, didn't know nothing about it. I said, how about sending my name in? So he did, and I went to the 1980 reunion in Augusta, and I haven't missed one since. Then in 1982, Captain Sam Barrett, he was a dental officer, took Captain Ziegler's place. Captain Ziegler went to division and later made major. I didn't know that till just recently. Well, Sam was leaving, him and his wife was leaving the 4th Division reunion at King of Prussia, Pennsylvania in 1982, and got to talk with him. He said, Hank, don't you belong to the 22nd? No, I didn't know nothing about it. So I gave him my name and address, and he was going down to Callaway Gardens where there's a hole in it out of Atlanta. He took my name in, so 1983 I started with them and haven't missed one of them.
Getting to know, when you go to, I'm interested in those meetings. When you go to the meetings,
I know people in every regiment, in every field, artillery unit, and ordnance, everything. Make acquaintance, you know, and talk with them, and I know them and all of them, correspond with a lot of them. It's a fantastic thing.
But up until 1980, when you heard about the association, you hadn't been in touch with any...
I had no contact or nothing. I didn't know anything. They're still trying to run names down. They send me, a guy out of New Jersey sends me names in this area, different regiments, to try to trace them down over the telephone. And I get a few of them. Some of them are glad to find out they can belong to an association. One guy up there at Mainsville, he come out of the Army, went from the Air Force, and if they didn't earn retired, and said he tried to find out something about the 4th Division through Army times and everything. Never had that to find out. I said, well, you hit the jackpot now. I'll send your name in, and they'll be sending you stuff, and you can join, and you'll be getting the 4th Division paper when you join. You pay them $5 dues a year. We have a scholarship fund, you know, for the men that was killed in the 4th Division. The Vietnam boys raised about $393,000 or $93,000 for that fund. And they've got, I think they've got up around $450,000 in that fund. In other words, when their children, the one that's killed, reaches age for college, they have a scholarship fund. I think it's up now to whether it's about $4,500 a year.
So the Vietnam veterans are getting pretty active in the association.
We've begun to get them in now. Sure are. That deal up at Washington, having representatives there, really got it started. Really got it started.
Where's your next convention? The 4th Division?
Boston, Massachusetts.
Boston?
He's in Hot Springs, Arkansas this year.
Have you ever met in Knoxville or in that area? In this area here?
No, they won't never meet here. Here's the way it's set up. We had 18 chapters over the country now. I think maybe we have 19 now. They formed a couple of new chapters since the Vietnam boys, you know, and I believe we got 19 chapters now, and they hold a reunion where there is a chapter. So they can line up, get special rates at a hotel that's big enough and can accommodate us, you know. And but now, this last reunion, the Mississippi chapter handled that one in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Mississippi chapter
Mhm.
handled it. And that's the way they do it.
The reason I was thinking about that, the 83rd Division met here in Knoxville, back in August.
Now, the 83rd is the one we relieved.
Yeah,
first.
that's right, that's what I thought about.
There's a little old bitty boy over there in the Con Hotel on that 43rd anniversary from the 83rd Division. Hey, 4th Division, we paved the way for you everywhere you went. I looked at him. I said, why, you little sawed-off run, I'm glad I don't have my pocket knife on me. I'd cut your ears off for souvenirs. Now, he left her in a hurry. Old Big Bud Thompson hauled ammunition for 11 months and never got wounded. Hauled ammunition for 11 months and never got wounded. Now, that's hard to believe, isn't it? Out there on the road, that ammunition all the time, every day. Old Bud, I thought he'd going to die later. He said, Hank, would you cut his ears off? I said, no, but I sure give him scared, didn't I? I said, I knowing what we had the dog throughout the front lines to take over with the 83rd had run off and left it. I said, that was an insult, real bad insult.
He's talking to the wrong person, wasn't he?
Yeah, no. I was a medic, but I still remembered.
Uh-huh.
I have that time that we went after that little old German corporal and the sniper pinned me down. That was one time I wanted a rifle real bad. But I had me a rifle, I'd have skinned up a tree somewhere and I'd have hunted him out like hunting a squirrel.
Mhm. But they never let any of you carry weapons at all?
We was told if you're planning on using the gun, right now is the time to transfer to straight infantry.
That's fair enough, I guess.
Except that's why you carry that identification in there with your picture and your fingerprints and everything. You're an unarmed medic, and you're supposed to be honored by the Geneva Convention. Of course, half the Germans didn't. SS didn't. Panzers didn't.
So there were times that you wished you had a weapon?
That was the only time I really wanted it. It was that when that sniper had us pinned down, trying to get one of their wounded.
Or did you just sort of poke up your head and he take another shot at you?
Oh, he was shooting all around us. He kept us down there for about an hour. I reckon he was mostly trying to keep us off till he found out for sure what we were, maybe, or whether there's any instrument around, you know.
Mm-hmm. You wonder about him? You wonder what happened to him, or?
You know, down at Augusta, Georgia, at Fort Gordon, you know, that was turned into a prisoner camp.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got a cemetery out there with Germans. There's Germans in it. Died there in that camp. Quite a few of them.
Uh-huh.
See, a lot of them come back that were wounded, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Never did get over their stuff and finally died.
You would, I would imagine when the wounded would pass through your hands back to the next level, where would they go from you?
From us, they went to the 4th Division Medical Battalion, and then they dispersed them on to field hospitals according to what their needs were. We had field hospitals, you know, that had surgeons.
Uh-huh.
If they needed quick surgeons, they went to that closest field hospital they could get them to.
But at battalion,
Maybe a lot of them that wasn't real bad, they just shipped them on to England or somewhere, you see, to the hospital.
but at battalion they didn't do in your unit. They didn't do any surgery or any particular.
Well, they done amputation with it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like legs and arms.
Mm-hmm.
But our doctors weren't surgeons in real medical life.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them was pediatricians or there's baby doctors, something in that field. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were psychiatrists. A lot of these U.S. officers were psychiatrists and infantry medics.
And what did they do if they had psychiatric training? What?
They had to take care of the wounded just like we would. whatever they could do for them, give them blood plasma or whatever.
Did they also try to treat people with shell shock or combat fatigue or whatever they called it?
Not on the front line.
Not on the front line.
That was done back somewhere else.
Did you all have?
If they was in the medical, if they was in the infantry medical unit, they was there as give first aid and get them ready for evacuation where they get better treatment.
Mm-hmm. You saved their life for now, and you move them on back.
I had one old boy that he was a T5. Of course, I was always in charge of guard and sent me to squad when I went out. He wanted to play around, hunt for something all the time. I never did call him down for one time. I said, Jenkins, I said, our job is to get in here and get these men out just as fast as we can to get them to real medical treatment. All they've got here is first aid. They need medical treatment. I said, now that's what we're going to do. We're not going to play around. We're going to get them in, get them out of here. Come back for more. That's the only time I ever called him down. He finally got killed.
Just out hunting souvenirs,
Don't
was he?
know why. I was gone from the 3rd Battalion of the service company.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know. He's listed on that stuff there. He was an odd guy.
What was he looking for loot or souvenirs?
Just anything you'd find. Now, when Leatherman got killed, he got his watch and all its effects and everything. He got that right off the bat.
Sounds like not too good a person to me.
Well, I'll tell you, he had a wife in the States. He had him a girlfriend in England, and he actually had a allotment drawn up to that gal in England to come out of his pay. Sent a allotment out of his pay to that gal in England. Now, that don't make good sense to me either. Sure does.
Well, I guess that sort of takes it down to the end.
This is something else you want to think of there?
Yeah. Is there any single thing that just stands out in your mind that you haven't told me about that you're going to wish you had after you left? Something I need to know to understand what it was like a little better?
Well, let's see. Pretty well covered, I guess, most of it there. Wasn't a whole lot to tell, you know, when I was with service company, all that remaining months and things. Of course, now, I didn't tell you about Paris, did I?
No?
You know, they rushed us one night. I had just joined the service company, 3 or 4 days before we took off for Paris. We rode all night 100 miles in the downpouring rain into Paris. And when we went into Paris on the 25th of August, you've never seen a parade in New York any larger than that. We could not get off our trucks. They was hanging out of the windows everywhere, and the streets was just packed and jammed. We couldn't move hardly. They had us just blocked. We spent 2 nights right in Paris, and then we moved out to the outskirts of Paris, an old barrel stave place, and we spent a couple of nights there, and then we moved on up to the Belgian border, and on into Belgium that way. We got into one little town up there in Belgium, and we seen some women with their heads shaved. They had patronized the German soldiers, and after we run the Germans out, well, they got them and shaved their heads.
Mm-hmm. Trying urgently, increasingly frantically to get across as the Americans are coming closer and closer. Fair number of them drowned in the attempt. Mexican losses somewhere over 1,000. American losses around 100 or so, which is surprising, charging into the center of an enemy line. Now, with this Mexican army in full retreat, question? No.
How soon did this take place after?
It's the day after. It's right close after.
I mean, there wasn't really that much time for regrouping. That was still time.
Yeah. So the Mexican army has been fairly badly punished the first day. The Americans follow up very quickly and hit them the next day. What's left of the Mexican army gets across the river, very wet and bedraggled, but Taylor's army can't follow it up because he doesn't have any boats. He blames Washington for not providing boats, which is somewhat unrealistic. He wanted them, he'd asked for them, but you're not going to get them from the United States in that amount of time. Insofar as he should have had boats, it was his responsibility to do it. And what's left of that Mexican army manages to retreat safely because Taylor can't get his people across. But as a result of these two victories, Taylor is promoted. He's made a brevet major general. That's a term, if you're not familiar with American command, that's used a fair amount in the 19th century. B-R-E-V-E-T, brevet. It's a temporary command given to officers who have shown themselves particularly effective in battle, and they are then temporarily promoted to the next higher rank or the next higher rank. And in this case, Taylor is promoted up a rank to a brevet major general. There are a number of advantages to things like that. In an army that doesn't give medals or other kind of recognition, it does enable you to recognize heroism, good conduct on the battlefield, and promote people who apparently are doing well, but you're only promoting them temporarily. You retain a permanent rank, whatever that is, and it's probably substantially lower. But you are, for the duration of the war, operating at a much higher level. And then when the war is over and you're cutting back the size of the army, then you don't have a lot of very high-ranking officers with not much to do that you have to pay in peacetime. And so these people will all revert to their peacetime permanent rank, whatever that is. There's very rapid promotion that's possible in combat, but there's also a very gradual kind of promotion that goes on in your permanent rank. And this is something you'll see a lot more in reading about when you read about the Civil War, you'll see somebody who's breveted up maybe 2 or 3 ranks as a result of action in the battle.
Does Congress have to approve those?
No. That's one of the advantages too.
There are a lot of field commissions, people enlisted for, you know.
You do have a fair number of them. It is not, let me see, Mexican. I'm less sure about this, but it's not uncommon. You've got some. I don't know how many come up. It's easier to do in the volunteers for people to move in that direction. My question is, I'm not sure how quick and easy it is in the regular force, in the regular army. You can do it in the volunteers, and there are quite a few people who do. They start as privates, and then they're suddenly sergeants, and then they're lieutenants, because they are particularly effective in battle.
They retain a rank after the war, though?
I would doubt that. Most of them didn't stay in anyway, the volunteers. They may have retained some kind of rank in the militia, but I don't know. That I don't know. So things go well. Immediately in May of '46, But then not much happens from May through the summer into August. Taylor is gathering supplies and more men, and losing a fair number of them to disease. But then in August, he sets out up the Rio Grande towards Monterey. Well, he crosses the Rio Grande and then cuts down southwest to Monterey. Takes Monterey in September after getting behind it and cutting the supply road to Saltillo. An army of about 6,500 Americans, about half and half, regulars and volunteers, against about 10,000 Mexicans in the city of Monterey. Well-fortified city. The city is taken in house-to-house fighting that's reminiscent of some of the fighting in Europe in World War II. Very tough, close work before the Mexicans are driven out of Monterey. And then he advances a part of his army to Saltillo, which makes good sense. He plans to establish a strong defensive line, basically from Parras, Saltillo to Monterey. And then with his army move south along the road. But much to his distress, he loses a good part of his army to General Scott, who is his rank superior in rank. And Scott's got his own campaign that he's running. And so he takes about half of Taylor's troops, takes about 4,000 regulars and 4,000 volunteers, and he leaves Taylor with less than 7,000 men. Taylor's army is suddenly cut in half. These people are shipped off to go with Scott. And Taylor, with far fewer troops than he planned, is ordered to leave a small covering force in Saltillo and pull back to Monterey, because the command believes that he doesn't have enough troops to make any kind of an advance, that he's better off in a strong defensive position back in Monterey than exposed forward in Saltillo. Taylor's outraged that they could do this to him, and he decides to consider his orders to be advice rather than orders, and advances down the road towards Mexico City. He gets about 15 miles from Saltillo down to Buena Vista, and he's met by the Mexican commander, General Santa Anna, and an army of better than 15,000 men against an American army of somewhat less than 7,000 effective. This is February 1847. Santa Anna had a complete copy of Taylor's orders. He captured a messenger with Taylor's orders. So he knew what Taylor was doing, he knew how many men he had, he knew everything he needed to know, and he had twice as many men, better than twice as many. In terms of effective troops on the battlefield, Santa Anna had an advantage of about 3-1. And the Mexicans launch a series of determined attacks against the Americans, primarily against volunteer regiments from all over, Illinois, Kentucky, Indiana, Arkansas. Throws in 2 divisions, hammer them badly, and under the pressure of the Mexican attack, the commander of the Indiana Volunteers, I'm not going to draw the battle out for you, but the Indiana Volunteers are not exactly in the center of the line, but they're close to the center, and they're in an exposed position and taking very heavy punishment. And in the middle of the action, the Indiana commander orders a withdrawal to slightly higher, better protected ground, easier to defend. The Indiana troops aren't bolting, they're simply withdrawing, but they're withdrawing during a battle. And one of the things you learn as you read about this kind of thing is that once somebody starts to pull back in an action, and the enemy is right out in front and pressing on you, then it's very easy for the word to get out on both sides that there's a retreat that's been ordered, and somebody is saying withdraw. And so the troops on both sides of that Indiana regiment pull back as well. And it appears that the Mexicans are going to succeed in blowing a very large hole right in the center of the American line. And if that's the case, then it's disaster for the American army, because there isn't much left in terms of reinforcement to plug that line. And at the crucial moment in the battle, Taylor himself comes on the scene with his dragoons and Colonel Jefferson Davis with the mounted Mississippi Rifles. And they plug that hole, gather up some more of the volunteers, and stem the tide of the Mexican attack, primarily rallying around pieces of artillery. The way that battle will go, the infantry will be forced into a situation where they're about ready to retreat. There'll be an artillery piece or two or three, which is being manned and firing into the enemy. The infantry will rally around the artillery to protect the guns and themselves and hold off yet another Mexican attack. It's a very near-run battle. The Mexicans throw in a third division, and again, it's the Mississippi Rifles and the Indiana Volunteers who stop it this time. And that attack is hit on the left as it's coming in, the Mexican attack is. And by the end of the day, the Mexicans withdraw, fall back essentially to the basic position when the battle started. But the Mexican losses have been close to 2,000 out of 15,000. The American losses somewhere between 750 and 1,000. The Americans win the field, they win the battle. The battle never should have been fought. Taylor shouldn't have been out there. Taylor's troops shouldn't have been out there. But once it gets going, Taylor does the things that a commanding officer has to do sometimes. Be relatively close to the action, a kind of physical and mental courage that Taylor's got enough of both. He's not going to run. Ends up with a couple of holes in his coat from bullets that have passed close by, a couple of holes in his horse as well. Germany says the two essential qualities of the general are physical and moral courage. And if that's the case, Taylor's got plenty of both. The battle shouldn't have been fought. It shouldn't have been. Once it did get fought, once it was begun, then he fought it probably about as well as he can. And that's pretty much the end of Taylor's campaign. He doesn't have the troops. He's against a Mexican army which continues to be larger than his, but it's, from that point on, it's pretty much skirmishing and some guerrilla warfare and some fairly nasty business, but no major actions from this point on until the end of the war. The action has shifted to the south, to Winfield Scott's campaign. Scott arrives off the coast of Veracruz in March of 1847. He's got 13,000 men. About half regulars and half volunteers. Interesting event occurs before the landing takes place. It's one of those difficult situations where you're landing a force in the face of an armed enemy, and we don't have much experience at that, and it's not easy to do. And to reconnoiter and look over the harbor area, Scott takes some of his staff and a couple of other officers and gets down into a small boat, and they get rowed around the harbor, looking at the Mexican defenses and trying to figure out how best to go ashore. And the boat comes under Mexican fire, cannon fire, and one of the Mexican guns almost hits that boat and blows it to flinders. It's a big coast artillery piece. It hits close by. The boat is hit with pieces of shrapnel. Water pours into the boat. It almost swamps, and just one small adjustment, and the boat would have been blown out of the water and everybody in it killed. And in that boat, I love this story, not only is Winfield Scott, Joseph E. Johnston, P.G.T. Beauregard, Meade, and Lee. All of them in that boat. And if you think a few people don't make a difference, figure the Civil War without that. Joseph E. Johnston, Beauregard, Meade, Lee, Scott, all in one boat. They almost all bought the farm that day in March of 47. And it would have been a relatively small, well, Winfield Scott being killed would have been worth at least a couple of paragraphs in most history. But there were other officers of some promise who were on board. The Virginia officers and that all would have faded. History would have taken a somewhat different twist. The landing, when it comes, is not easy. The Mexicans don't contest it strongly, but it's very difficult to move from sailing vessels down to small boats and then get your people ashore, even in relatively calm water, which this is. It's especially hard to get the horses off. Horses don't like being on boats to begin with, and trying to get them off is very difficult, even when you've got them on a dock, when you've got slings and things. And so what they do is just lift up the railings and run the horses off into the water, assuming that being sensible, which horses sometimes are, they will swim for shore, and most of them do. Some will swim on sea and dry. It's not a very sophisticated way of landing an amphibious assault force, but it's the best thing we've got, and that's the way it goes. They get ashore and take the city of Veracruz, shell it, and move down the national highway from Veracruz, following the old route of Cortez centuries before. Cortez comes ashore and he takes that same route into Mexico City. They're blocked by very strong positions. First at Cerro Gordo, which doesn't show on your map. It's between Veracruz and Jalapa. And as will frequently happen, the Americans are very creative in their approaches to the Mexican position. The way it will work out, the Mexicans will be in a strong defensive position. Good forts, good trenches, good blockhouses, a strong position blocking the highway. They've had centuries to build this up, and the Mexican army will be in place. The Americans will reconnoiter, look it over, find some way to get around. In this case, it's Robert E. Lee who finds the route through some ravines and down a cliff and up a little used trail. They bring part of the American army and some light artillery and fall on the Mexicans at Cerro Gordo from a direction they aren't expecting it. They don't come head on into the Mexican strength. Rather, they find some other way to get around. And in this case, they come around the Mexican flank and attack the flank and rear and drive the Mexicans out of those positions. And then there's a kind of pause because the enlistments of many of the volunteer units have run out. They signed on for a year, these volunteers. And they fought a couple of battles, and why not go home? They know what it's like to get shot at. They've been there. They've seen the elephant. And they can go home and say they fought in the Mexican War, and a lot of them do. Not too many of them sign on, and so you've got this pause while Scott waits to try to refill the ranks of his army with new people and build up more supplies. And he sets off for Mexico City. This is August and September. He rests for most of the summer there, and moves out in August, across the mountains and down. He's got about 6,000 men in that army that leaves with him. And I've mentioned this before. He takes a very large risk. He does not try to keep open his line of supply to Vera Cruz. He simply piles everything that he can carry on wagons and hauls it off with him. Because if he tries to keep that supply line open, he's got to detail a lot of his troops to protect the roads, to keep the Mexicans from raiding and attacking American supply points and the rest of it. To keep that road open, he's got to cut down on the force that he has in hand. And so he thinks, faced with an unpleasant set of options, he takes the one that he feels is going to work the best, and that's simply cutting himself off, not leaving anybody behind, letting the Mexicans close up behind him. But what that means is that he has to win every battle from here to Mexico City. Because if you lose battles and get cut off, you've already cut yourself off. If you lose battles, there's nobody to come and help. There's no way you can bring in more supplies, more reinforcements. It's a very dangerous thing for a commander to do. And that's why it doesn't get done very often. Grant will do it around Vicksburg in a somewhat different situation, but it doesn't happen very often. But he pulls it off. A series of heavily defended Mexican positions, taken in most cases by indirection. There are not too many sort of stand-up confrontations. The Mexicans will come at them, and the Americans will come at the Mexicans, but usually not up front. And a series of victories. Contreras, Churubusco, Molino del Rey, Mexico City itself. In each case, a large Mexican army defeated by a smaller American force, which is out on its own. And by September, Mexico City has been captured. The forts outlying it, Chapultepec and the others have all fallen. And in September of 47, the Mexicans sign a peace treaty in which they cede to the United States what's called Upper California, or presently California, along with what will become the states of Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and a part of Wyoming. And they recognize the Rio Grande as the southern border of Texas, as opposed to the Nueces. The Americans get everything they wanted from the war. We have expanded American territory, to include Texas, which we already claimed, all the way through here, at a relatively low cost. It goes well. If you're looking at a war, as I always say, unless you get killed in it, or lost somebody in it, if you're looking at a war, it didn't last very long. It's relatively cheap in terms of lives and money, and the rewards in terms of territory were great. We got everything we wanted. It all worked out, beginning to end. The Army goes off to the frontier, as you know from your text, to fight Indians and map, explore, map out routes for the railroads and wagon trains. They fought 22 recognizable Indian wars from the end of the Mexican War, the Civil War. trying to establish control of much of this new territory and beyond. I'll drop it at that point, come back on Friday, we will talk about the beginning of the Civil War. If I could have that piece of paper, I hope it's there. Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it. I'll see you Monday, I'll see you Friday, I'll see you Monday at the meeting, we'll have to